On the day my wife Elizabeth died, I thought the worst pain I'd ever feel was losing the woman I'd loved for 35 years. I was wrong. The worst pain came 12 hours later when her own family showed me exactly what they thought I was worth. I'm Nathan Rogers, and I'm 61 years old. What happened next taught me that sometimes the people closest to you can be complete strangers. The funeral had been everything Elizabeth would have wanted. Simple, dignified, filled with people whose lives she'd touched over the years. I sat in the front pew wearing my best navy suit. The one she always said made me look distinguished, trying to hold myself together. Everyone kept saying what a devoted husband I'd been. How I'd cared for her through those final months without a single complaint. If they only knew the half of it. My son Kevin gave a nice speech about his mother. My daughter Amanda read a poem that made half the church cry. Even my other son Lance managed to say something heartfelt. I listened to it all, nodding when people offered their condolences. Shaking hands with old friends from the construction business who'd known Elizabeth and me for decades. But it was Kevin's wife Brittany who really caught my attention. She'd been watching me with this calculating look in her eyes, like she was sizing up a piece of property. Every time I'd step outside for air, she'd be huddled with Amanda in the corner, whispering. When I'd sit down to rest, she'd give me these tight little smiles. The reception was at our house afterward. Well, what everyone assumed was our house. I watched as relatives I barely knew wandered through the rooms. As distant cousins seemed to be appraising the furniture with their eyes. Lance's wife kept asking pointed questions about my retirement plans. While Amanda's husband made comments about how big the house was for just one person. But Brittany was the one who really showed her hand. She spent the whole afternoon acting like she was already in charge, directing the catering, rearranging flowers, telling people where to park. Like she owned the place. The last guest left around 8:30. I was in the kitchen loading the dishwasher. Trying to keep my hands busy so my mind wouldn't drift to how quiet the house felt without Elizabeth. When I heard footsteps behind me. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that stopped right at the kitchen threshold. Well, that's over with, Brittany announced. I didn't turn around. I kept loading plates, focusing on the simple task to keep my grief from overwhelming me. Thank you for helping organize everything, I said quietly. Elizabeth would have appreciated it. Cut the act, Nathan. Her voice was sharp, cutting. I finally turned around. Brittany stood there with her arms crossed, still wearing her black dress but having shed any pretense of mourning. Behind her, Kevin shifted uncomfortably. Amanda and Lance flanked them, creating what felt like an intervention. What practical matters? I managed. This house, Elizabeth's assets, your living situation. She said each word like she was explaining something to a slow child. Kevin and I have been talking with Amanda and Lance. We think it's best if you start looking for your own place. The kitchen seemed to tilt around me. My own place. Amanda cleared her throat. What Brittany means is this house is quite large for one person, Dad. And frankly, the upkeep costs alone. Are you telling me to leave? I interrupted, my voice barely above a whisper. Brittany smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. I'm telling you to be realistic. You're 61 years old, Nathan. Elizabeth took care of you while she was alive. But now you need to think about downsizing. Finding something more appropriate to your situation. My situation? Well, you retired early from that construction company. Elizabeth was the one with the teaching job, the steady income, the benefits. She gestured around the kitchen like she was already redecorating it. The family needs to make some hard decisions about her estate. I felt something cold settle in my chest. This is my home. I've lived here for 20 years. And it's been wonderful, I'm sure, Lance said, finally speaking up. But Mom would want us practical. There are 3 of us kids plus grandchildren to think about. College funds, retirement planning. Elizabeth left a will. I said quietly. Yes, and we'll honor whatever small provision she made for you, Brittany said dismissively. But let's be honest about what this is. You were her second husband, not her business partner. You didn't build anything together. You were just there. The words hit me like physical blows. Just there. After 35 years of marriage, after caring for her through breast cancer, after building a life together, I was nothing. I think you should pack your things tonight, Brittany continued. Kevin and I can stay here to help manage the transition. It'll be easier for everyone if we handle Elizabeth's affairs directly. I looked at Kevin silently, pleading with him to defend me. To remember that I'd been his stepfather since he was 8 years old. But he wouldn't meet my eyes. Where am I supposed to go? Brittany shrugged. There are some nice senior communities around here. Assisted living facilities. You'll find something suitable. Assisted living. Like I was some helpless old man. I stood there in my own kitchen, surrounded by people I'd considered family, and felt the last pieces of my heart break. The grief from losing Elizabeth was nothing compared to this. This was betrayal. This was being erased from my own life. But as I looked at their faces, Brittany's cruel satisfaction, the others' uncomfortable but determined expressions, something else began to grow alongside the pain. Something cold and quiet and patient. Okay, I said simply. Brittany blinked, clearly not expecting that response. Okay. I'll pack tonight. I'll be gone in the morning. The silence that followed was deafening. I think they'd expected me to fight, to beg. To make a scene that would justify their treatment of me. Instead, I turned back to the dishwasher and continued loading plates. Well, Brittany said, thrown off balance. Good. That's very mature of you. I didn't respond. I just kept working. Listening as their footsteps retreated from the kitchen. As they began dividing up my life in hushed, excited whispers from the living room. They had no idea what they'd just done. They thought they were getting rid of a burden, claiming what was rightfully theirs. They thought Elizabeth's widower was just an old man with nowhere to go and nothing to fight with. They were about to learn how wrong they were. As I closed the dishwasher and listened to it hum to life, I allowed myself the smallest smile. Tomorrow my real life would begin. And theirs was about to get very, very complicated. I packed 2 suitcases that night, just 2. Everything else, the family photos. The tools in the garage, the fishing gear Elizabeth always complained about, I left behind. Let them think that was all they were getting. Let them believe the grieving widower was walking away with nothing but some old clothes and memories. The Hampton Inn on Route 9 became home. I checked in under my full name, Nathan Edward Rogers, and paid cash for a week. The desk clerk barely looked at me. Just another senior citizen traveling alone, probably visiting family or handling funeral arrangements. Perfect. The first call I made was to Roy Patterson. Roy had been my attorney for 25 years, but more than that, he'd been handling my affairs quietly for the past 15 years. Not that anyone in Elizabeth's family knew that, of course. They assumed I was just a retired construction guy who'd married their breadwinner. Nathan, Roy's voice was warm when he answered. I'm so sorry for your loss. Elizabeth was a wonderful woman. Thank you, Roy. I need to see you tomorrow if possible. Of course. 10 o'clock. Actually, could we meet somewhere other than your office? Somewhere private? There was a pause. Roy had known me long enough to read between the lines. The family's giving you trouble. Something like that. I'll come to you. Text me the address. Roy arrived the next morning carrying his leather briefcase. Wearing the expression of a man who'd dealt with family greed more times than he cared to count. I'd ordered coffee from the lobby. A small gesture that would have raised eyebrows if anyone had been watching. How bad is it? Roy asked, settling into the armchair. I told him about the previous night, about Brittany's demands, about being told to find appropriate housing, about how they'd dismissed me completely. Roy's jaw tightened as I spoke. Do they have any idea about your actual situation? None whatsoever. Elizabeth and I decided years ago. It was better that way. Let them think she was the breadwinner and I was just the guy who fixed things around. And you're sure you want to proceed as we discussed? I looked out the hotel window at the parking lot. At the ordinary cars filled with ordinary people living ordinary lives. Yesterday they would have seen me as one of them. Just another older guy, probably struggling on a fixed income. They had no idea that the man in room 237 had been quietly building wealth. I'm sure. How long will it take? Roy opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. The preliminary transfers can be completed. Everything's been legally yours for over a decade anyway, Nathan. Elizabeth transferred her teacher's pension and the house deed to you in 2010. I nodded. What Roy didn't mention, what the family would never guess, was that I'd been using Elizabeth's steady teacher salary cleverly. The construction company I'd retired from. I'd sold it in 2015 for $4 million. The little projects I did around town. Those were commercial developments worth millions. The fishing trips I took every few months. Business meetings with property developers in 3 different states. What about the house? Roy allowed himself a small smile. That's where it gets interesting. Technically, you could evict them today. But I assume you have something more educational in mind. I want them to show me exactly who they are first. Let them get comfortable in my house, making their plans, dividing up what they think is theirs. Give them enough rope to hang themselves. And then I'll remind them that assumptions can be dangerous things. The next 2 days were the most satisfying of my life. Not because I enjoyed their confusion, but because for the first time in years, I was watching people face real consequences. The first call came 6 hours after my meeting with Roy. Brittany, of course. Nathan, we need to talk. This whole situation has gotten out. I was back in my hotel room, watching the evening news like any other retired guy spending the evening alone. Has it? You know what I mean. The house, the arrangements, all of it. There has to be some way to work this out reasonably. Reasonably? I let the word hang in the air. Like how you reasonably threw me out of my own home the night Elizabeth died. Silence on the other end. Then, we were all grieving, Nathan. We weren't thinking clearly. You were thinking clearly enough to tell me. I was just there. Clear enough to start planning how to divide up my property. But we're family. No, Brittany. You made it clear. I'm not family. I was just Elizabeth's second husband who didn't contribute anything. I hung up and blocked her number. The second day brought Kevin to my hotel. The desk clerk called up to announce him, and curiosity got the better of me. Kevin sat across from me in the lobby, looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in 2 days. Nathan, I'm sorry about everything. Brittany gets carried away sometimes, and I should have stopped her. Should have, could have, would have, I said calmly. But you didn't. I know, and I regret that. But you have to understand, we thought Elizabeth had left us provided for. We thought the house. Her retirement account, everything would be divided among the family. And when you thought that, your first instinct was to throw me out. Kevin's face flushed. It wasn't like that. We just thought you'd be more comfortable somewhere smaller, more manageable for someone your age. Kevin, my voice was sharp enough to cut through his rambling. Stop lying to me and yourself. You wanted me gone completely. So you could have everything without having to consider my needs or feelings. He stared at his hands, unable to meet my eyes. What are you going to do to us? The question hung between us like a blade. I looked at Kevin, this man I'd helped raise. From a scared 8-year-old whose mother had just remarried. I had the power to destroy them financially, to make their lives difficult. But looking at him, weak and frightened, I realized something. I didn't want to destroy them. I wanted something much more valuable than revenge. I wanted them to learn. I'm going to do exactly what I said I would do. You have until tomorrow evening to remove belongings. And then you're going to figure out how to live your own lives, make your own decisions, and face consequences. The final 24 hours were the most interesting. I had Roy arrange for a locksmith to be ready, and I drove to the house. At exactly 6 o'clock on Friday evening to see if they'd honored the deadline. The driveway was full of cars. Not just Kevin and Brittany's vehicles. But Amanda's car, Lance's truck, even some I didn't recognize. They were having some sort of family meeting about me, presumably about what to do. I walked to the front door and used my key. They hadn't thought to change the locks, probably because it never occurred to them. Hello, I called out pleasantly. Hope you don't mind me letting myself in. It is my house, after all. I found them arranged around the living room. Like a war council. Brittany sat in Elizabeth's favorite chair, still playing the role of decision-maker. Kevin and the others flanked her. While two people I didn't recognize, a middle-aged couple, looked distinctly uncomfortable. Nathan, Brittany said, standing up with forced dignity. We were hoping you'd come by. We wanted to discuss a reasonable settlement to this whole misunderstanding. Settlement? For what? For the house. Obviously, Kevin and I have put work into this place over the years. We think we deserve some compensation for our contributions. The unknown couple exchanged glances. The woman cleared her throat nervously. Perhaps we should go, Brittany. This seems like a private family matter. No, please stay, I said warmly. I'm Nathan Rogers, Elizabeth's husband. And you are? Gary and Patricia Williams, the man said reluctantly. We're Brittany's parents. So they'd brought in reinforcements. Brittany's parents, probably told some version. That painted me as the villain. How lovely to meet you, I said. I hope Brittany has explained the situation accurately. Patricia Williams looked between her daughter and me with obvious confusion. She said there was some sort of dispute about Elizabeth's will. About who inherits what. There's no dispute, I said calmly. Elizabeth's will is very clear. She left modest bequests to the children. And everything else to me. The only complication is that most of what people assumed was Elizabeth's property was actually mine. Gary Williams frowned. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Neither did they until a few days ago. You see, I've been financially independent since before I married Elizabeth. The house they've been planning to inherit. I bought it in 1995 with money from my construction business. The comfortable lifestyle they've been enjoying. Funded by my real estate investments, not Elizabeth's teacher salary. I watched the older couple process this information. Watched their expressions change as they realized their daughter might not have been entirely truthful. But Brittany said you were just a retired construction worker. I am retired from construction. I sold my company 9 years ago for $4 million. Since then, I've been managing a property portfolio worth about $18 million. The silence that followed was profound. Gary Williams's mouth actually fell open. So when your daughter threw me out of this house the night Elizabeth died, I continued conversationally, she was essentially evicting me from my own property. When she told me I never contributed, she was speaking to someone who had been supporting this entire family's lifestyle for decades. Brittany's face had gone white. Her parents were staring at her with expressions of horror and disbelief. Brittany Marie Williams, her mother said in a tone that probably hadn't been used since Brittany was 12. Please tell me you didn't actually throw this man out of his own house at his wife's funeral. It's complicated, Mom. It's not complicated at all, I said gently. Your daughter made assumptions about my financial situation and treated me accordingly. She's now learning that assumptions can be expensive. Gary Williams stood up, his face red with embarrassment. Mr. Rogers, on behalf of our family, I want to apologize for what Brittany did. If she treated you that way during your time of grief, then she was raised better than that. As Brittany's parents gathered their things and headed for the door, I could see the final pillar of her support system crumbling. She'd counted on them to back her up. 20 minutes, I announced to the room after the front door closed. Then I'm changing the locks whether you're finished or not. They scrambled then, grabbing bags and boxes they'd obviously packed in preparation for this confrontation. Amanda and Lance avoided eye contact as they carried belongings. Kevin moved like a man in a trance. But Brittany stood in the center of the living room, staring at me with something approaching hatred. This isn't over, she said quietly. Yes, I replied, equally quiet. It is. She left without another word, and I watched from the window as the cars pulled out of my driveway one by one. When the last taillights disappeared around the corner, I called Roy. It's done. They're gone. How do you feel? I considered the question as I walked through my house, really looked at it. For the first time since Elizabeth's death. It felt different now, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from the walls. I feel free, I said finally. 6 months later, I was sitting in my workshop behind the house, rebuilding an old fishing reel. Elizabeth had bought me for my birthday, when my phone rang. The number looked familiar, and curiosity won out over caution. Mr. Rogers, this is Dr. Sarah Martinez at Mercy General Hospital. I have a patient here asking for you. My blood ran cold. Who? Kevin Rogers. He's listed you as his emergency contact. He said to tell you it's important. Despite everything that had happened. Despite the way his family had treated me, Kevin had still listed me as the person to call in a crisis. What happened? Car accident. He's stable, but he's asking for you specifically. 20 minutes later, I was walking through the hospital corridors. My work boots clicking against the polished floor. I found Kevin in a private room, his left leg in a cast and his arm in a sling. Nathan, his voice was soft, relieved. You came. Of course I came. You're hurt. He tried to sit up straighter and winced. The nurse said they couldn't reach Brittany. Her phone's been disconnected. I wasn't surprised. I'd heard through the local gossip network that Kevin and Brittany's marriage had imploded after they'd been forced out of my house. Where is she now? Gone. She left 3 months ago, took what was left of our savings and moved back with her parents. Kevin stared at the ceiling. She said she married me for the lifestyle we had. Not for me. When the lifestyle disappeared. I'm sorry, Kevin. Are you? He turned to look at me, and I was startled by the clarity in his eyes. Even after everything we did to you? I considered the question seriously. Was I sorry? 6 months ago, I would have said that Brittany leaving was exactly what Kevin deserved. But looking at him now, broken and alone, finally forced to confront the consequences of his choices, I found that I genuinely felt bad for him. Yes. I'm sorry you're going through this. Sometimes the people who claim to love you most are the ones who see you least clearly, and it takes losing everything to discover who truly values your worth. Real strength isn't about having money or power, it's about knowing when to use both wisely and when to offer forgiveness to those brave enough to earn it.